In this lecture, we'll be taking a look at the origins of human language, in this case bringing together evidence, biological evidence from the fossil record, and in this case our understanding of the requirements of human communication. Looking at the late fossil record, remains associated with the genus and species distinction of Homo erectus become very important when we are attempting to understand the origins of human language. Erectus fossils cover a significant span of geological time, and what's really important about this is that we also associate overlaps with other sapient forms. The evidence that we associate with erectus material dates geologically from approximately 1.9 million years ago to 300,000 years ago. What is also unique about erectus material is its regional variability. So in fact, we have variability principally with cranial characteristics outside of Africa and within Africa when we look at the entire breadth of erectus materials. And that's alluding to another very important point that I'd like to just stress, and I know we've covered it in other lectures, but Homo erectus really represents the first fossilized member of genus Homo to have been found outside of Africa. It is a multi-regional global expression. And when I utilize the term global, I'm really relegating, in this case, our focus on the old world. Recent studies having to do with this biological variability within erectus material have really resulted in some controversies. When we take a look at the work of paleoanthropologists in the Lake Turkana region of Africa, we realize that elements of the erectus material have been reclassified. In this case, Homo ergaster represents a reclassification of material from Lake Turkana. But let's take a look for a moment at some of the basic qualities of this very unique expression. I believe one of the most important and unique qualities of Homo erectus, when we look at its imprint or its impression in the fossil record, is archaeological in nature. In terms of erectus material, and you would have covered this in your readings, we have a standardized tool industry, very often associated with the Acheulean hand axe, a standardized tool type that is associated with an important erectus site, in this case, Saint-Acheule. What we must ask ourselves are, what are the cognitive qualities that are requirements for having a standardized tool industry across at least 4 geographical regions? We see Acheulean remains being recovered not only from Europe, in this case Central and Southern Europe, but we also have Acheulean material associated with Asia, Africa, and Indonesia. To make sense of this standardized tool industry, we have to take a look at the craniometrics associated with erectus material, and what we find is that erectus had, or presents us with rather, a very primitive cranial morphology. Cranial capacities in this case, and this really represents a composite of gender and of, in this case, biodiversity across the entire species, range between 750 and 1250 cc's or cubic centimeters. This is rather low, but it does overlap with the overall expression that we associate with anatomical modern humans. However, it's on the lower end, a smaller end. When we look internally, so when we look at that endocranial surface and we take a look at some of the endocasts of erectus brain material that have been recovered by geologists, physical geographers, and anthropologists, we have a little bit more to go by in terms of what erectus is doing in terms of communication. One of the first important areas that we associate with communication in this case, how we're getting this kind of standardized process of producing tools across multiple regions, has to do with the frontal lobe. What is referred to as the Broca's area of the frontal lobe is really important when it comes to human speech or complex communication. This region of the frontal lobe of the brain is important for the logic that underpins abstract communication, in this case speech. It's sounds, the manipulation of sounds, the combination of sounds, and then relating combinations of sounds to specific cultural meanings. This would have been important in order to have communication across regions, to migrate across regions, and ultimately to have a standardized culture across at least 4 geographical sites or regions. There is a problem, however, with the craniomorphology, or cranial morphology rather, of erectus material, and of course the morphology of fossilized forms which date before erectus material, and we talked about both gracile and robust australopithecines. What I'm specifically addressing in this case is the basocranial region and its flatness. As I mentioned in an earlier lecture, erectus material, in terms of its cranial design, is platycephalic in nature. It's elongated in terms of that cranial vault, and it is very narrow or short in terms of the overall height of the cranial vault. This leads to a very flat base of the skull and places both the pharynx and the larynx, 2 important regions, soft tissue regions, that we associate with human communication and speech, in a very primitive location. It would have, in this case, presented erectus with very limited phonology or range of sounds, contrastive speech sounds, that would have been incorporated, in this case, into complex communication. So erectus had the capability of abstract thought. Its cerebral cortex tells us that it would have functioned probably in a very asymmetrical way. It had a very enlarged frontal lobe with an enlarged Broca's area, so it had all of the underpinnings for complex language. However, the actual physical or mechanical qualities that would have been required to produce the range of speech sounds that we associate with human language today would have been very limited. As a result, our gaze must once again focus on archaeological evidence. And when we look at archaeological material, of course, we have the standardized tool industries which are associated with this latter portion of the fossilized or mineralizing record. However, we now have to look more closely at this notion of ritual, because in ritual, in human ritual, we have the complexities that are working side by side with our complex system of communication. Erectus and later anatomically modern expressions of genus Homo recovered from Asia, in this case, and Southern Europe provide us with a number of highly ritualized practices. When we're looking at Neanderthalensis material, we have the ritualized treatment of dead remains. In this case, we have mortuary practices, which are very, very complex. So we have little to no question with regards to the Neanderthalensis material and complex communication. But if we stick with erectus for just one moment more, we have a very important site, in this case the cave site of Zhoukoutian, where we have approximately 40 individuals associated with this genus and species, Homo erectus, that have been recovered. And we have a seasonal occupation, in this case dating to between 460,000 years ago to 230,000 years ago. So this would have been a cave site that members of the population, members of the community, would have returned to time and again. Now, we don't have mortuary evidence associated with erectus and this all-important site. However, we do have evidence of fire. Simple hearths are paired, in this case archaeologically, with remains of animals, in this case, that were treated with heat in some way, shape, or form. So animals are being processed in a regulated or culturally rule-governed manner, and we have the introduction of cooking, or in this case of of heat to these remains. Evidence of fire associated with erectus material appears in southern Europe. In this case, in modern France, we have the southern location of Terra Amata, and this gives us not only evidence of fire, but also evidence of primitive shelters, or things such as lean-tos. So we have in the erectus material and its archaeological evidence, we have in this case the building blocks of complex communication, and we know by the time we get to our Neanderthal or archaic Homo material that we are dealing with, in this case, communicators of a very significant level, or of a level that would be associated with human cognition. So the archaeological evidence provides us with indirect evidence for the following characteristics. If communication is occurring in Asia, in Africa, in Indonesia, and in Europe, if we have members of genus Homo migrating from one region to the next, bringing with them not only their own technologies, in this case tool traditions and industries, but also similar practices in terms of the hunt and in terms of household or everyday household practices, and of course mortuary traditions as well. So the indirect evidence then that we can associate with this is that we have a rudimentary phonology, or in this case a range of contrastive speech sounds that are incorporated into this process. We have combinations of speech sounds. We have a morphology, most likely, of language. We have syntax, in this case an arrangement of words into phrases, so we have a logic that underpins this communication process. And we most likely are building what becomes a very complex lexicon, or a summary of sound combinations or words. With complex cognition, with an ever-growing range of vocalization, with a very patterned speech expression, we recognize that there are additional changes that must be occurring in order to allow human beings, in this case, members of genus Homo, to spread across the known world and to survive in a wide range of geographic and climatological regions. So phonemes, or contrastive speech sounds, will most likely be organized symbolically. These sounds then would be classified according to what they present or what they are associated with. And then over time, these combinations of sounds must be manipulated in such a way as to really fulfill the communication process.